And the reason for this webinar is to go through what GDPR is, how do you get compliant with it, how do you prepare for the 25th of May, and then how do you manage your data after the 25th of May, how do you prepare yourself for things like audits, how do you prepare yourself for things like giving data back to customers or letting them know what data you currently hold, and what are the protocols that you have to take into place now, and then what you do moving forward and managing that on an ongoing basis. So the first question I'm going to answer is, what is GDPR? GDPR is an harmonized attempt to boost the rules around data compliance, data security, data management, and also the lack or the inability to spam unwanted users or entities is what they're called. This is across any European citizen, so it's not restricted to Europe per se, but it's European citizens is where the restriction is. With that in mind, that's where the next question goes, is does this only apply if you're within Europe or whether you hold data within Europe? Long answer, no. And the reason there isn't a no is because if you have any European citizen in your database, then you have to, for the sake of that European citizen, comply with it. And therefore you have to comply across all your data sets, so even the non-European citizen based within that. Now the piece with that is there's not many companies that I know outside of Europe that doesn't hold at least 1 or 2% of their data is European citizen based. And it doesn't have to be someone who just resides within Europe. It's anyone who holds a European citizen right. So that could be someone who is moved to the US or to Australia, but they originate and citizens within the European Union as a whole, then they still fall under the European guidance of the General Data Protection Act. So with that in mind, even if you're outside of Europe, it still actually restricts you in terms of how you manage data. When does it come into effect? Of course, that is the 25th of May. Having said that, it doesn't mean at the stroke of midnight, fines are going to go out left, right, and centre. There is going to be protocols and investigational stuff that will come into play. But I would just be careful with, and bearing that in mind, that when it comes to 25th of May, that you're already ready. And I wouldn't, and like the girls mentioned earlier, I wouldn't wait till last minute to do that, because all that's going to do is put you on the back foot and makes you an easy target for them to come after. Why should you care about GDPR and what impact does it have? Well, a lot of people have a lot of negativity around it. They say, oh, it's really bad for our data, it's going to make marketing so much harder. It means I'm going to have much smaller marketing lists, I'm going to have the inability to reach the size of market I was getting, I'm not going to be able to go and buy data, I'm not going to be able to use outsourced companies in India to get me hold of prospects. Well, the first thing I mentioned on that's technically already illegal. So going and using prospect lists and cold data lists does not comply with the Electronic Communication Act or CAN-SPAM. So that you should actually be doing anyway. But take that aside, I actually feel GDPR is a good thing. The reason I would say it's a good thing is because, yes, you may have 2,000 contacts, 200,000 contacts, 2 million contacts in your marketing list. But if they do not want to engage with you and they do not want to engage with your products or services, they're never going to become a customer. So you're diluting yourself and you're inflating the numbers that you feel you're reaching because you have that size of a marketing list. But if they're not going to buy from you or they're not going to engage with your content, why have them in the first place? Most of us pay per contact that we email, whether you're using something like MailChimp, advanced marketing, response marketing platforms, or you have your own one and you're using an SMTP server to do that. There's always going to be that issue that you're going to pay a certain volume for that level of contacts that you're reaching, however many times you may email them. But if they're never going to buy from you, there's no point emailing them in the first place. So for me, I see it as a good thing, because it means the people that I have opted into my list who have actively engaged with me and said, I want content from you, well, they're people who are actually going to potentially become customers one day. And they can go through nurturing programs, they can go through nurturing campaigns, remarketing campaigns. But the fact that they've opted in legitimacy with me and in a legitimate way tells me that they actually are interested in what I've got to talk about. They're interested in what my company's got to offer. Therefore, they're the people I want to have in the first place. I don't want people who are just going to delete my emails, move them into a folder, unsubscribe from them, because that's a waste of my time, it's a waste of theirs. So I think GDPR is going to force people into that realm of actually using targeted marketing and get to the audience that they actually need to get to. There's a lot of speculations about massive penalties and legal action and fines. Yes, they're true. They're a little bit exaggerated. yes, there will be big fines in extreme circumstances. So one that's come to mind is moneysupermarket.com. They tried to use GDPR as an opportunity to try and get all their unsubscribes for the last 5 years back into the marketing list. And whether it was a mistake or they did it on purpose, they are now in the process of being investigated. And by the sound of it, they're going to get fined quite heavily. That's because they've deliberately gone against the rules that are in place, and they've tried to abuse data. Because these people have already said to them, I don't want your content, leave me alone. And they've deliberately sent them an email. And actually within that email mentioned you previously unsubscribed. So they acknowledged that that data was not subscribing to their content, and they still emailed them. That's against CAN-SPAM 2004. So that's an old legacy rule that they still broke, which is why they're being fined for it. Fines can go in excess of £40 million. That is correct. But again, the fines are more around actual data breach, lack of communication to people with your data, the data is breached and you don't communicate that with them, or it's also where you're not taking, and they take reasonable precaution to protect your customers' data. Now that is open to interpretation to what you say is reasonable precaution. Some people say, well, I've got it on a spreadsheet somewhere that only people within my networking can access. Some people have it encrypted on a server. Some people have a data processing system. Some people use CRM. There's various ways that you can manage your customer data. You just have to prove that the precautions you have taken are necessary. And if you can't prove that, which is going to be quite difficult, that's the hard bit, that's where the fine will likely come into play. There is legal action that can be taken, e.g. directors that are set as the, if you want to call it a data officer, and these are only applying to larger companies where it's required, and there is rules in there that says certain criteria to make it that you have to have a data officer appointed. And you're talking massive amount of volume, you're talking if you're taking payment details and storing those payment details under the Payment Secure Act, then that's when you need a data officer in place. That person is now legally responsible for your data as a whole business. If you have a data breach, or again, you've not taken the precautions in place to protect your data, and then when you find a data breach, you fail to notify the ICO and you fail to notify those who are impacted by that data breach, you can actually carry a prison sentence. That is correct. But again, you're looking at very extreme cases. You're looking at where it's mass amount of data being leaked, and they can see that you've actively taken steps to hide that or not to protect the end user whose data is being taken. So again, it will happen. It's going to be very rare, and they're not going to be handing out fines and prison sentences left, right, and centre. It's not the aim. In terms of the ICO and where they stand, so as an organisation under the Government Act, they are not getting any bigger. They're not going to be given any additional resource, at least not in the next 2 years. So they're currently going to operate under the same resource, the same entity structure that they operate under at the moment, but they're going to have a much bigger burden in terms of having to try and reach out to these people, find people, and capture those who are failing to meet GDPR. So what does that actually mean? Well, it means that they're not going to suddenly be chasing you all the time because they haven't got the resource to do it. They're currently struggling to manage things like cookie banners, etc. already, because the amount of sites are out there and the fact that sites are being created every day. They haven't got the resource to do it proactively. So initially, what they're going to start to do is do a reactive approach, similar to what they do with CAN-SPAM and IP and mail server blacklisting. Is it's based on a report and investigation stage. So if someone reports the fact that they feel their data has been misused or they're getting email spams, etc., and it goes to the ICO, then they will investigate that business in question. They're not going to go out and start auditing people randomly to catch you. They haven't got the resource to do it. They would love to, and they have requested several times to get that budget. They're not going to get the budget in the next 2 years. Therefore, they're not going to be in a position to actually do that. Now, that's not to say, well, don't worry about it because you might not get caught, because there is other ways to get slipped up, and they're using what's called bot tools to try and find people without having to use manpower to find those people. So I wouldn't say you'll get away with it, or you'll escape under the radar, because you won't. So that's something to bear in mind. One thing to do, and one thing I would say about GDPR is there's 5 key impacts it's going to have to your business, both long-term and short-term. So one is in terms of actually the definition of personal data is now being widened. So before, personal data was pertaining to B2C type data, so an individual person. They're now changing, and this is also going to impact the electronic communication law which is going to probably come out next year or the year after, and they're actually changing it to an entity or end user, which is going to be the definition under it, which also therefore applies to business communication and business contacts. So not just your B2C, but actually your B2B people are going to be impacted by this as well. Because before they were seen as a business contact and not an end person, it was an end user, because it's not technically their personal data, it's their corporate data, the corporate entity, so their job title, their company email address, their company phone number, and that kind of slipped under the radar in terms of law, and there were certain laws that didn't quite capture that. GDPR is going to deal with that. The consent now, it used to be ambiguous. You could have ambiguous or what's called forced opt-in or soft opt-in or single opt-in, all these terms that we've all heard a million times. They were not explicit consent of contact or rights to communicate. They were purely they were fluffy, they were very ambiguous. They didn't really say we will not take your data and we will share it or we won't share it and here's who we're sharing it with. That's all going to change. So now the emphasis is on explicit, direct, clear, concise forms of communication and say, this is what we're going to be doing with your data. This is how we're going to use your data. This is, you're going to consent for us to retain it in this type of way, use it in this type of way, and share it with these individual entities. So if you do have a business where you have to share it with third parties, so for instance, one of the companies I'm involved in, the appointment setters, they share their data with a third party that they're working on behalf of, and that's how their business model works. They now have to look at stuff like Article 11, and I'll touch on that a little bit later, what that actually means, and issuing things like Article 13. And again, I'll touch on that and what that means a little bit later. But it means they actually have to make it clear that they are not the data controller or holder, that they're going to be sharing or processing that data onto a third party, and who that third party is and why they're doing it. And then at the point of handing over, they issue something that's called an Article 13, which is basically an agreement between them and that third party that the third party takes control of the data. They are the controller, and therefore they're the ones legally responsible for whatever happens to that data at that point, taking the legality of that process in business. So e.g. marketing agencies, this impacts you. SEO agencies, it impacts you. Sales companies, it impacts you, for instance. Also, what it will do is in terms of you now have to, and I think this is the bit that companies are struggling with, you will be requested to by the ICO to deliver individual personal information in what's called machine readable formats. So the two that are currently accepted is JSON, and I can touch on what that is and I'll show you how that works. I've actually got a live example, or flat HTML. With that, people have the right to request that information, and you have to give it to them or the ICO in a machine readable format that they can digest it, see what information you're actually holding, and this is including cookie information like Google Analytics, heat maps, etc., and email and individual personal data. The other thing as well is what I touched on earlier, which is the bigger bit, is the breach, the data control. So they want to see data control audits being conducted internally. You have to prove that you're doing that. They want to see that you've got strict guidelines and security measures in place to protect the data you're holding. And the more data you hold, or the more pertinent that data is, e.g. banking information, the stricter they want to see your processes being. And again, you have to prove that you've taken what's called necessary steps, however ambiguous that may be, to protect that data. And then therefore you have to have a way to audit, manage that data, that if there is a breach, however, whatever level it is, whether it's server level, website level, internal level, regardless, you have to, one, notify the ICO at a certain level, and you have to notify those customers that have been impacted so that they know that their data has been breached out and therefore potentially could be leaking out. Where before there was the rules around it were a little bit not as strict. So for instance, you look at the big famous case is Yahoo, eBay that was recently, the Ashley Madison was a massive scandal, and so you had a lot of high profile people impacted by that. Ashley Madison knew that their data was leaked 6 months before they told the public. What they're trying to do is negotiate with the people who stole it to buy it back, or buy the fact that they wasn't going to leak it. They requested too much money, so Ashley Madison then thought, well, we're not going to lose that amount of money, we'll have to notify the ICO, and that's when it became public. But that took 6 months. So technically, from the 25th of May onwards, Ashley Madison would have been fined a massive amount, and the fact that they tried to take protocols to hide that information that it was leaked could be massive trouble from a legal perspective, and also a fine and business and ICO perspective. So I guess the question is, what do you do now? So you know GDPR is coming, you know what it means, you know some of the pros and cons of it, you know some of the kind of areas where you're going to get fined and the legal action may take place, you know how the ICO stand on it and the resource. So what do you do now that you know that? Well, the first thing is to understand, how does GDPR impact your business particularly? Everyone's going to have slightly different requirements. Again, it depends on what type of business you are, what type of information you're holding, in what format are you marketing to that people, and what do you want to do with that data, and then therefore how long are you holding it, why are you holding it, and that's going to be your justification to why you have it, and then who else has access to it and how are you sharing that access, is it secure, for instance. So I'm going to flip my screen, so you're not going to be able to see me for a couple of minutes. I'm going to show you some instance of things that you're going to need to take into account, some things you have to think about, some bits are going to be the next steps, shall we say, once you now know what to do. So I'm going to flip my screen to see what I'm showing. So you should be now to see a home screen here of Eximus. And what this is going to be, and what I'm going to touch on with this, is the forms of consent that can and cannot be accepted. So in this case, I've deliberately got a consent form that would not meet GDPR criteria. So if you have a look at this, it's got a form and it has got an opt-in. And the reason this wouldn't meet GDPR requirements is because it's ambiguous. So this says, by using this form, you agree with the storage and handling of your data by this website. But what that doesn't do, it doesn't tell anyone, what does that data, what am I doing with that data, how am I handling it, how am I storing it, where am I storing it. Not that you have to go into that detail, but you have to give an indication to what am I doing with that data, is it securely held, etc. Is there any third parties who are going to have access to it? By ticking this, what am I actually doing? It's very ambiguous. It doesn't really tell me what I need to know as an end user before I opt in. I mean, it's good that it's taken the first step and it's got the opt-in, but it doesn't tell me anymore. The second and more important bit, which people kind of forgot about before, which is cookie banners and cookie statements. This was something that no one really spoke about or worried about previously. The reason you should worry about this, and the reason you should care about it, is because this is what the ICO is going to look at, and they're going to be using cookie bots to check what cookies you're actually storing, what cookies you're actually pulling on people, and is that written within your article here. So you've got to talk about how you use it. Is there ability for people to disable cookies, and you have to give them the right to disable cookies? What cookies do you actually have set? So what are internal ones like login, profile information, site preferences, stuff like opting into newsletters, subscribing to stuff, stuff like e-commerce platforms, the fact you're taking payment facilities, and those payment facilities, what they're going through, e.g. PayPal, or whatever form of payment gateway you're using. But then also what's more important is stuff like this. So the fact that you're using third-party stuff like Google Analytics, what third-party cookies are you tracking? Because that's the bit they want to see, is who are you using, social media stuff, and then they want to see stuff like this, what ways to contact you about it. Other stuff that you're going to need to worry about is privacy policy, and this is a big one. This is the bit where you're going to talk about the data side of things, what that data is, how do you collect it, how do you store it, what are the protocols around your data management. So if we look at stuff like this, it talks about cookies and it has a link to the cookie page. It talks about them as a legal entity and what you can do to get a hold of that people. It talks about whether it's a UK and EU law cookie and where it came into place. Again, like I said, this has been around for a while, but the ICO have not been in the greatest place to manage it. So the Electronic Communication Directive came in play in 2011, but they're still not fining people about this because it's hard for them to manage it. Stuff like asking third parties, the website itself and the entity it holds, and then the scope of that privacy. What data is collected and how it's collected. What is your use of data? Is it secure? And under the security clause, are you following that under the data protection principles? For instance, what third-party websites and services are using your data or have access to your data, if any? And then what stuff like the change of ownership, the control, what is your process if you was bought by another company? How's that data secure moving forward? And then how are you controlling that data? So this is stuff that they want to know. Again, how are you accessing the data, the security around that data, the fact that you have cookies on the site and what those cookies mean, and then general information about the privacy of that people's information. This is the bit that's key. And also this bit where you mentioned when it was last updated. This is also key. This is what they want to see, is how frequently you're updating your cookies and your privacy policies and your terms of conditions to reflect changes that you do with your website or new things that you're adding onto your website? Are you updating it? And again, you have an activity log of that being updated. So I would suggest to use lawyers to write this initially, and then you can start to try and update it yourself. But I would get it written by a lawyer first and foremost. That's my advice. And I'm going to quickly just touch on terms, conditions, and use. And you'll notice at the top of this page it says you have already accepted terms, conditions. If you went onto this website, you'll see, and you go into one of these pages, there is an accept button on each of them. And it uses cookies to track whether I've accepted it. That also helps me, if I was to be audited, to say that my users on my site have checked my terms and conditions and they've accepted my terms and conditions and how I'm using them. So that covers me, so I can use a cookie trail to say this particular person who may say has reported me as an instance actually has read my terms and conditions, has read my privacy policy, and they've accepted it. So they accepted the information I've collected on them cookie wise and they've consented to that. And that's the bit that's key, because that will also help. It's not mandatory, but it is advised, because it helps you build this case of audit tracking and the fact that it's been so-called read, and whether the user actually read it or not, that's a separate issue. But if they've accepted it, they've basically said that they have read it and that they agree with stuff around how they should use your website, how they should register and what you do with that registration information, links to other sites that you may have within your site, and disclaimers that cover you, limit of liability, etc. This is what you want to be able to support yourself with in an ICO audit if requested. And again, like I said, you're not going to be asked to be audited straight away. It's not, they haven't got a resource to do that. And then this is the crucial bit about the data stuff. So I was talking about this earlier with machine readable, being able to feed that back to people, having people be able to position to be able to rectify their information that you hold on to make sure it's accurate. And also this key bit where they have the right to ask you to forget them. And this is not just unsubscribe from my newsletter. This goes beyond that. This is actually destroy any form of personal data you have on me and remove it. And to be able to do that effectively. So we have this built into our site, and again, I'm happy to discuss this with people what mechanism they can use. So again, if I wanted to find out what information this site had on me, I could enter my email address. I can consent to it, and then I submit it. And what that will now do is it will submit this information as a request to the back end, and then the back end can then process that and feed that data back to me in an email in a machine readable version, so JSON and a PDF, because obviously the end user may not have a JSON reader, so it gets presented in a PDF for them to read, and then the JSON that's machine readable and complied with ICO. Again, in terms of forget me, you can see that this is built into a WordPress site, so it is quite easy to use and set up. I know a lot of people do use WordPress. You can select what information you want to be forgotten on you. This is the information that this site currently collects on people. You enter your email address, consent. Again, you always get that consent, and again, they can check the privacy policy if they don't know what they're consenting to, and you submit that, and that would then send them an email to confirm that it is actually them. So again, you're taking that step of protocol and security. It will send them a unique token link that they can click on from their email address, which will then process that forget me setup, and it will then go into the back end and delete and remove all personal information, not just unsubscribe them. And again, they can rectify that data. So they will get sent a link and they can put through the information that is actually correct, and that will update the back end. Again, this is where the JSON plays into part. If they requested it from this section and they copy and paste the JSON script into here, the machine will understand this because it's machine readable, and that means they can update their information in this section, again, our email address, so that it sends them an email to confirm it is actually them that is updating that information, and gets the kind of cookie consent for email that they've done it. So again, from an audit purpose, it's tracked and they can then submit it. So that's it in a nutshell in terms of what GDPR is, some of the things you need to touch on and be aware of, and then some of the things around the actual data management stuff. One thing that a lot of people are saying is compulsory is to have HTTPS sites. It's not strictly compulsory under GDPR. It is something that Google is going to be penalising sites for. So this is more SEO, and will be flagging to end users that the sites are not secure, especially if they process payment. But actually under GDPR, you have to prove that the connection between the site and the server and the data being moved from one to the other is secure. But it doesn't mean the actual site has to be HTTPS or TSL or SSL for the technical terms of that. It just means that you have to be able to say that the handshake of data between your site and however you get it to whatever you're processing your data, whether it's CRM, server, whatever that is, that process itself is secure. So long as that's secure and you can prove it, you're actually fine with not having a HTTPS. But actually, with the cost of HTTPS being, less than £20 for a year, in most places, I would say it's worth doing because it just gives that level of security. It also means that customers are going to see it and feel a bit more safer about using your platform. And it also helps, meaning that the data that's actually put on the site is also encrypted, not just the handshake between where it's going to be processed and how it's been entered on the site. So that's kind of an overview. Hopefully that gives you what you need to know in terms of generally how it works and what the impacts are for you. And actually, in fact, I see it as a positive thing. What I'm going to do now is hand over to Jade and the guys and see if there's any questions you guys may have that you'd want me to answer. So I can see one is, if you have a big marketing list already, how do you go about making sure it's compliant? Well, I'm going to use the term nuke that data. And what I mean by that is you have to send them, and again, you've only got to the 25th of May to do this. After that point, you cannot do this. But as you can email all of the people in there, explaining some of the emails they've received from you over the years, the value of that content, really trying to hit on the reason why they should care to keep the information from you. Then what you do is you ask them to opt in. So you would have an opt-in button that may land to a subscription management page. Or you can have it go to a auto opt-in based on unique link, depending on the marketing platform you're using. So if they click on opt-in or opt-out, you can capture the opt-ins, which means at that point they've approved opt-in, they've given you eligibility to contact them, you're compliant. And again, you'll have that audit trail, that email going out, and the opt-in process taking place. Again, how clean that will be depends on what systems you're using for email marketing, what forms of data systems you're using, whether it's CRM, etc. So, but that would be my process. I've had a massive list I've collected over the years, and we know that they're going to be from various sources. Let's not kid ourselves. We know some of it's going to be legit that you've caught through newsletter opt-ins or through white paper downloads or case study downloads or social media campaigns, and there might be some that you've bought and obtained through events and stuff over the years. I would put it all into one big list, compose a very compelling, strong email to say, you value the content you get from me, you've been getting it for years, we've got an ongoing relationship, do you want to risk losing access to that information? If not, opt in, here's how you can do it, and try and make that opt-in process as seamless as possible. Make sure it's compliant from an audit point of view, but make it as easy for them to opt in. So e.g., if it's a case of you're using a marketing profile like MailChimp, for instance, it already has all the information. So why not use a token-based button that they click? It lands on a profile, has all the information. All I have to do is hit a consent box and hit submit. So they don't have to fill any information in. It's just click, they're opted in. Because the harder the process is to get them opted in the first place, the bigger your churn rate's going to be. And there is going to be a churn rate, naturally. I've done this with several companies, and they typically only see about 45% of the marketing list opt back in, which means they're losing 65% of that. But unfortunately, that's what GDPR is going to do. But again, going back to my point earlier, if they haven't opted back in, my question is to you, are they really engaged with your content? Do they really want what you're giving them? And do they really care about what you're pitching to them through email, through other forms of communication? Because if they did, they would opt it back in anyway. If they haven't opted back in, are they a waste of your time to send them an email so they're never going to become a customer? That's the question I would leave yourself with. So yes, it's a bad thing, you're going to lose a percentage off that list. But if they're not engaged with your content and they don't want to opt in, is that really a bad thing? I would say no. I would say I'd rather have a smaller list that's more targeted. It's actually going to cost me less to keep marketing to them because they're going to become a customer. They're going to give me money as a business. And that's what's important. It's important, obviously, to get content and stuff. And I can touch on the later stage how you can use your content to get people back in. That's under the compliance umbrella. But I would say if they haven't opted back in, they really don't want to work with you, or they don't want your content at that point. So what would you do? What would you need to structure an opt-in? You would need to have a way from whether it's cookie-based if you're sending to a website, or from again, like I said, a token-based button. And for instance, MailChimp does this automatically. If you send them a link and you use the slug tag update profile and you drop that into behind a button, it would automatically capture the token access or the unique token it makes for each email user it sends it to, because that's how it knows that it's their profile, not someone else's, based on the email address. And if they go land on that page and then click an opt-in button and submit it, and then it sends them an email to double opt-in, which MailChimp does anyway because it's a standard double opt-in process, that would be compliant. If you use, again, it depends on the marketing platform you use. Some of them you have to maybe actually send them to a form, a subscription form, and basically get them to resubscribe. That's very tedious. It's a bottleneck, let's be honest. They're having to go and fill their information in again. That's going to massively decrease your conversion rate. So I try and stay away from that piece. But essentially what you need is 3 pieces. You need to have a form that you've communicated with them and offered them the chance to opt in. If they do not react to that email, either they ignore it, you have to then opt them out. You have to acknowledge that as an opt-out. Whether you want to or not, you have to. That's the way GDPR works. The second piece is to have some form of electronic traceable data trail to say that they reacted to a consent form or a consent mechanism in a positive fashion. And what that means, again, is landing on the profile page, clicking a opt-in statement of fact. And again, that statement of fact has to be concise and exact. It cannot be ambiguous because that doesn't count. And then a function or a positive action is a submit button. So e.g., I choose to opt in and I hit submit. That would count. They're the 3 key things you need. If you cannot get all those 3 key pieces done, then you'll have a hard case to plead it's compliant. You could try and feed the ICO story, but ultimately it'll be up to them whether they believe that story or not. So again, the fines aren't based on whether you're a big or small company. When it comes to this side of things, the ICO couldn't care how big or small you are. It's about how big and small your data is and how secure and what protocols and steps you've taken to comply with the ICO regulations around GDPR. So you could be the smallest fish and it will still give you the biggest fine. If they see that you've been buying this left, right and center, you've been spamming people, you've not made their data secure, you've had breaches after breaches, and you've not told anyone, you've not tried to resecure, you've not tried to rectify, you're not conducting internal audits, then you're going to get a pretty hefty fine. And in that case, you'll probably go bust because obviously you're too small. So it's not aimed at the size of businesses. It's aimed at the size of data that you hold and the steps that you've taken. So actually, it's easier for small companies to get aligned because naturally you're more likely to have less data. You're more likely to have a tighter team to control that. It's just making sure you've got the processes and steps in place to protect the data, to show that you've got it in a legitimate form and the consent has been non-ambiguous and that data is opted in. And that's the key, not forced in, not soft opt. It has to be fully fledged opt-in, then you'll be fine. Plugin and website. So this is the question. So you have a lot of open source CMS systems out there. So you've got Wix, you've got Square, you've got Joomla, you've got Drupal, you've got WordPress. They, as an out-of-the-box solution, do not comply. So for instance, we look at WordPress. WordPress is probably one of the biggest open source CMS systems used in the world. But by the sheer nature of it being open source and being the biggest, is also from a security point of view the most vulnerable. Reason being is hackers know if they create a scrape bot or a PHP injection or a database injection through comment boxes, for an instance, it's going to be really easy for them to inject into your site and pull your data. And they also know if they can do it for one, because you're on a standard framework, they can do it for most of them unless you've locked it down. And that's going to be the same for all out of the boxes. Out of the box will not work. You will need to do some form of customization. You will need to use, there is plugins that can do it for you, and again I can touch on those in more detail after, to help secure it, lock it down, and then also things to help opt in or keep you compliant. So for instance, Jade put on the other day on a group about a WordPress plugin for GDPR. Now that's good for getting the consent form. Now you do have to slightly reword the statement of fact based on what you do with the data, but the fact that it automatically pushes it into things like Contact 7 plugins and all the other various contact plugins is great. So that's an initial step. There's various other plugins and some form of customization work you can do to make an out-of-the-box solution work for you and be compliant. It's just about what resource you've got, what data you collect. And I think the first question you need to ask yourself is, what data are you collecting? Why are you collecting it? What is the value to the end user that you've taken their data? How are you then storing it? And how are you then securing it? And then are you sharing it? Once you ask yourself those 6 questions, then you can start to map out your next steps to become compliant. Because you'll know what you're collecting, so you'll know the level of risk of that. You'll understand what data you're then holding, why you're holding it, what is the story you're going to tell the ICO to why you need it. Because that's everything they want to look at, is are you collecting data purely for commercial gain? If that's the case, they will start to look at you, and they'll try and find reasons to stop you using that data, easily give you sanctions. So you need to look at a way that it's mutually beneficial for you as a business to collect the data. We all want it, that's how we sell to people. But also, what's the benefit to the end user? Why should they give you the data? And again, is your statement of fact correct? And again, I can happily go through this and touch on it in a bit more detail for people when they need it. Is there any other questions that I've missed, or any other questions that people have before we close off? If there isn't, that's fine. What I will do is I'll drop in the comments my contact details. Again, I'll send you some links to a PDF that we wrote as a business talking about GDPR and how it works, what it does, what these steps are, and it will cover some of the things I've already touched on, and it will give you the first steps to what you need to look at and where you need to start. And again, I'll leave you contact details from me, so if you do need questions, you can drop me questions. I'll kind of get you started off and give you the initial what you need to do to be able to take a step back, look where you are, look where you need to be, and what that gap is. So kind of do a gap analysis on yourself. And again, you could always inbox me, but it's probably easier to get hold of me by email anyway. But if there's no other questions, I'm going to bring this to a close. Hopefully it's been valuable for you guys. Hopefully you've learned a lot from it, and hopefully now you can get yourself ready for GDPR before it comes in play, and then you know what you need to do post GDPR going online to maintain that compliance moving forward. So that's the key. There's no more questions, guys. Enjoy the rest of the evening, and again, if you've got any questions, drop me a message and I'll happily help you and give you some advice.